This podcast is brought to you by Connect First Credit Union. And welcome back to What's Next, Alberta. You know, it's a show where we're talking about the future of our province. We're talking about what's happening here, and we're hoping that we're bringing a little bit of hope into the lives of the Albertans who want to tune into our show. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about interesting stories, and we're going to bring some great guests, and I've got a really special guest for you today. But more than anything, today we're going to talk a little bit about leadership. You know, people who have the foresight to see what wasn't there before and have the courage to go out and make that happen. And there's lots of great stories and success stories, around the world that you hear about, but sometimes we don't do a good enough job talking about the great stories that are happening right here. And today, our special guest is someone very close to us at Connect First Credit Union. It's our CEO and somebody who's been in this province for decades and who's seen the province through the ups and downs that we've gone through. And as a leader in a very significant organization over the last many years, he's had the foresight to do things a little bit differently and to tackle problems with a new approach and with a new spin and a new take that is resulting in what we believe is going to be a credit union designed for the 2020. So let me start by introducing my boss, Paul Kelly. Paul, welcome.
Hello, Wellington. I am well. How are you?
So, yeah, I'm doing great. So my only ask of you, Paul, today is that we don't turn today into my job evaluation.
No, that's right. I think you have 6 months to go before we do that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. But Paul, you came to Alberta over 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. You moved to Edmonton, I think, when you arrived.
I started off in Edmonton. That's correct. Yeah.
So what brought you to Alberta in the first place?
Well, so I've been in the finance game, the financial services game for quite a while. I was actually working for a company in Toronto at the time. We were owned by Metropolitan Life, big company, small company. We were a small division of, and many Albertans might remember an organization called Principal Group, which ran into difficult times and a lot of difficult times for Albertans. Basically what happened was Metropolitan Life purchased Principal Group and combined it with our company in Toronto, which was called Morguard, and we created a new company called Metropolitan Trust. And we had basically two head offices, one in Toronto, one in Edmonton. And at the time, as a management team, executive team based in Toronto, we made the decision, which was unusual for the time, to let's move out west. Let's abandon our Toronto office and move to Edmonton. So we actually moved to Jasper Avenue, which is what the original Principal Plaza, which is now occupied and branded by Canadian Western Bank.
Oh, there you go.
So that was my journey into Edmonton, into Alberta. And so that was, to date myself, more than 30 years ago. So I began my journey in Alberta, in Edmonton, in the financial services business, in the trust company, right. Which, by the way, trust companies at the time, very similar to banks and credit unions. We lent money, we borrowed money. It was a very similar business. It wasn't just trust business. So I did begin early on to get an appreciation of what Albertans needed and, frankly, what the banking business was lacking at the time to serve Albertans, which in many ways are unique from other parts of Canada.
And you were drawn here at a time when I think the Alberta economy was under pressure back at that time too.
Yeah. In fact, the company, ultimately, we didn't survive. So we were a national company, and Canada itself was in some pretty rocky times. And typically what happens, of course, when Canada has some ups and downs, we tend to have higher ups and lower downs. And that was certainly the case in the early 1990s. So yeah, we struggled as a company. The economy was struggling. Our customers were struggling. It was a difficult time, but a learning lesson. Again, what we had to do to survive. And luckily, we had a pretty strong shareholder in Metropolitan Life. So we took a lot of lumps. We tried a lot of innovative things for the times. But ultimately, as an organization, Metropolitan Life, frankly, called Uncle and said, we're going to pull the plug. So interestingly, one of the things that happened, we had a branch network of about 10 branches, of about 5 of them in Western Canada. We ended up selling those branches to Canadian Western Bank, which actually doubled their branch network.
Wow,
so at the time, their CEO, Larry Pollock, and I used to chuckle that we were the ones, in fact, who kickstarted the branch network for Canada Western Bank. So that was my first 5-6 year journey in Alberta. And from there, I moved to Calgary, which is a different story.
Yeah. So you joined the credit union movement.
Right.
So what attracted you to the creded union space?
I have a story that I think many of our members have. And what it is, graduated back in the 80s, 70s, a decade, long time ago. And my My first job, so no credit history, and I had my first job. I had a regular paying job, which is a big deal coming out of school. And as a naive 20-something, I went to 5 banks. And when you're in your 20s, you don't even know what that means, but you knocked on a few doors, and I wanted a car loan. I needed a car. I didn't have a car. And I think I went to all 5 banks, all 5 Toronto-based banks, and got usually a comeback in 6 months if you have a bit of credit history, And I went to a credit union called HEPCO, and I didn't know what a credit union was. To me, the words credit and union didn't kind of make sense to me. I didn't know what it was, but my first car loan was through a credit union, HEPCO Credit Union, which is now part of Meridian Credit Union in Toronto.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I did have an experience literally coming out of the gate as a full-time employee for the first time in my life. Then about 10 years went by, and then moved in Alberta. And then there was a credit union called First Calgary Savings based in Calgary. And I mentioned earlier, our company, the Metropolitan Life Company, was winding up. So I was in need of a job. I was based in Edmonton, and through some serendipity and luck, I landed in Calgary and began my career, which is now 25 years plus, which is now Connect First Credit Union.
Right on. And we are definitely going to get to that story around how we became Connect First. But let's start at the beginning of First Calgary. So when you arrived at First Calgary, mid-90s, what does it look like? What's the organization about?
We were in a very difficult financial situation. And so I mentioned that Metropolitan Trust ultimately was wound up. At the time, virtually every trust company in Canada was wound up. The industry went away. People heard names, Confederation Trust, Fidelity Trust, all those organizations all got hit by more or less the same thing. Very tough economy. The banking business, frankly, wasn't kind to small institutions. And so as those institutions went away, there was also an impact in Alberta to the credit unions, and particularly in Edmonton and Calgary. Yeah. So when I joined First Calgary in 1995, it was actually only 7 years old. It was formed in 1988. But it was formed in a unique way. It was actually the government of Alberta forced 8 small credit unions to merge with government support because of the impact on the economy. So First Calgary started off with no equity. Any money we made, any revenue, net income we made, half of that went back to the government to pay down their support. We're under something called supervision, which meant, in fact, the government, our regulator, was heavily involved in our operations, to the extent where we couldn't buy an ATM without their approval. So it was a very interesting, challenging time in terms of joining a company that as part of the management team, you frankly didn't have a whole lot of control over the operation of the company.
No kidding. So you found a way to make success at First Calgary. So what were some of the things that happened to get First Calgary on a great track? Because it's built a great business in Calgary over the last many decades.
Yeah, I think the brand itself, and now it's, for the First Calgary brand has been around for a while. I think the fact that we are unique, we're the only Calgary-based financial institution, period. There's no one else based in Calgary that has a full-service retail business banking operation. So I think that mattered, particularly to Calgarians. And obviously we're Calgary-centric, so that was our focus. We actually ended up paying back the government in 5 years, got released from supervision. Well, it sounds like getting on probation. You get paroled and you're out into the street and you're allowed to operate. And from then on, as I say, we grew significantly. And the Alberta economy changed. As I said earlier, the ups and downs of the Canadian economy, we have higher ups and lower downs. And so beginning in the late 90s and into the 2000s, as Alberta strengthened, the economy got better, so did our company. And we had some pretty significant growth in those days. I recall annually our loan growth, 11, 12, 15%. We were growing without acquisition. So First Calgary was not a credit union, frankly, for 15 years or more, where we frankly didn't look at merging. We simply grew organically, Calgary-based, but there got to a point where we're simply being Calgary-based. We didn't think that was enough for a long-term viability.
Yeah, right on. And that kind of brings us to, I guess, what's next. And, and I talked a little bit about the courage that leaders have when they build something special. And I feel like we're in the middle of building something really special. But when you were there, 5, 6 years ago, when you were imagining how that next step, how do you make First Calgary a larger provincial organization? What were some of the ideas, the thoughts going through your mind?
Yeah, and one of the challenges with being really concentrated in any market, even if it's a good market, Pure concentration in our business isn't always good because, again, the highs and the lows, you get hit by the lows, you win more with the highs, but the word diversification, even for individuals, again, you don't buy one stock and cross your fingers for your retirement plan, typically not a prudent plan. And similarly, we felt, and I certainly felt, that being solely based in Calgary without any diversification, we didn't, for example, have any rural exposure. We weren't dealing with ranchers and farmers. We weren't in the agricultural business. We weren't in small towns. That diversity was really important to me. And so we began a journey back in about 2013. Began to talk to other smaller credit unions, which were primarily based in rural Alberta, and that was their basis. They had agriculture and ranches and farms and small businesses related to that industry and small oil and gas operations. So quite a completely different book of business and type of member customer than we had. And to me, that not just complemented us, but allow us to expand our reach beyond the city of Calgary.
Yeah, right on.
So that began our journey of talking to other credit unions. And we're kind of unique in that in the credit union business, you can't buy another organization because we're member-owned, we're cooperative. The only way two organizations can come together and merge is if the members, who are the owners of both organizations, through a vote, agree to do so. And in that period of time, from 2014 to 2018, we actually did 5 separate merger amalgamations to create what is today Connect First Credit Union.
Which is pretty cool. And like, how did you get the wheels rolling to convince some of these other credit unions to join you in First Calgary?
It was probably mostly because we offered a unique operating model. And a typical merger, not just in the credit union world, but in any business, usually the large organization absorbs, takes over the smaller organization, and it disappears. The name disappears, head office disappears. It basically becomes a bunch of numbers that end up on a balance sheet. So the proposal that I made, and the one that caused a lot of interest in Alberta, was to look and say, can we in fact keep separate brands? So for example, a name like First Calgary, frankly, may not resonate that well in a town like Bassano, in a place like Brooks. So, for example, our first merger was Chinook Credit Union, which was based basically to the south and east of Calgary, a very strong credit union, and again, a good brand, but also had a real affinity in each of their locations. Where when people said they bank, they frankly said we bank at the credit union. In all our locations, we are the only credit union in those locations, and that happened with Chinook. So when we consummated our first amalgamation, it was a true partnership. We retained the brands First Calgary and Chinook. Those are the brands that the members knew. So the day after the amalgamation, nothing changed. The employees were still the same. The sign was still the same. But we created almost a holding company, would be one way to describe it, called Connect First Credit Union. So we did amalgamate and consolidate our back office, but we left the front end of the business relatively unchanged. And that was very unique. It hadn't happened before in Alberta.
Yeah, right on. And then you picked up Legacy and...
Legacy and Mountain View were the two other credit unions that merged. And again, we retained their brands. There was a couple of small credit unions that also were merged, but they were very tiny and they became part of Connect First. So yeah, when we got to 2018, we actually were sitting with 4 separate, unique, member-facing, public-facing brands with, again, Connect First Credit Union as somewhat of the umbrella, the back office. We deliberately did not promote the brand Connect First. It was promoting First Calgary and Chinook and Legacy and Mountain View. And again, we continued to grow, which was important. Scale is important in the banking business. I mean, it's ironic in that we are a large credit union. We're usually about one of the 10 largest credit unions in Canada, but we're very, very small compared to the banks. So we are large local, but very small national. And frankly, in many ways, that's how we like it.
Exactly. And that's, going back to your first story, what attracted you in the first place is we can approach our members differently because they're our owners, right?
Yeah. And one of the unique propositions, I think, of a credit union, and I get asked this a lot. Usually I get asked, what is a credit union? And so we do have an awareness branding issue in Canada, and we know that. And in fact, one of the things of becoming Connect First Credit Union as a brand is really to promote and make awareness for Albertans. What is a credit union? What are the advantages? What's the value proposition? But one really, I think, unique aspect of being a credit union is when not to beat up any of the banks, but when a customer of one of the large banks walks into a branch or calls them and looks to secure a loan or some business, The objective, rightfully, of that bank employee is to extract as much revenue from that member, that customer, because they're a customer.
Yeah.
And those banks are owned by largely institutional investors and other investors, not that person who walked through the door. So the key difference with a credit union is that member and their members, they're also owners. So when they walk through the door, when they sit down with us at a branch or call our contact center to negotiate a loan, or perhaps they need some advice on their investments, they own the company. Our objective is not to extract as much revenue as possible for them, because ultimately whatever revenue we do get from that member, that customer, ends up to them. It's their retained earnings. They own the company. They own an undivided interest in all the monies that we've made as a credit union over time. That's quite a unique difference, and you'll see that in the way we approach and talk to our members, because again, we don't have this kind of overbearing influence of an institutional investor, of Bay Street looking at our earnings, saying, why did your revenue go down? You need to charge more in fees to get more money from those people that bank with you, because they don't own your company.
Right.
Where in our world, they own the company, they are the members, they are the owners.
Right on. Now, one of the things that we've talked a lot about in the past few episodes of What's Next is, how businesses are innovating, because all of Alberta's got to reinvent itself to a certain extent. And certainly, I think you led this organization to some big decisions. This is what attracted me to you and your vision for this company. Is what was the big decision to decide to bring these organizations together differently and take some big steps, like the big conversion we just went through a few weeks ago?
I think a few things. One is that I mentioned we're one of the larger credit unions in Canada. We're in a business, the banking business, financial services business, where scale does matter. And there's certainly a size where you simply you can't compete. And one of the worries I had when we were just first Calgary, even if we continue to grow in this market, we simply would be too small. And the main impact is the ability to invest in technology. Again, and we do a lot of collaboration work with other credit unions and partners, but you do need to be of a certain size and scale to invest in technology. And the banking business, the financial services business, technology clearly has been an important driver in the past, and post-pandemic and into the future. Banking technology will be critical for any institution. And so what we've gone through in terms of our banking system conversion is, in effect, bringing together brand new systems in virtually every aspect of our business. Everything from what the member sees at the front end to all the back office systems that we have to support, to have the ability to get data, to mine data, to make sure we know what our members need. It's been a 3-year journey, but that to me is probably the most important step we've made in the last decade, because it now positions us, particularly from a technology point of view, to compete. And again, I argue strongly that a small institution like ours, with a focus, though, and a marketplace that's unique that we can focus on, will give us the ability to compete with anybody.
Yeah, totally agree. And it's funny, I know a lot of the questions that we've been getting over the last few weeks since we've gone live with the new banking system, and certainly we had some hiccups early on, but some questions were like, why bother changing? If it ain't broke, why fix it? Right. Like, why do we need to have more modern technology?
Yeah, and it's not unique to the banking business, but I can't think of an industry that would say to their owners and customers and members to say, we've got a platform that was created in 2005, we think we're good.
Yeah.
And think if you're in retail, or think if you're in any business, to say 15-year-old technology, we're probably fine. Yeah. And we basically we're running on 15-year-old technology.
Right.
And so our business isn't unique in that respect. But again, one of the things that we do have, because we are small enough, is we do have the ability and did have the ability to make a pretty wholesale change, where I think it'd be very difficult for larger institutions to do something as challenging as we did, in terms of, in effect, replacing all of our technology. But everything we replaced it with was best of breed, best in brand. Yeah. We did a lot of research in terms of finding out what is the right technology out there. We did numerous sort of requests for proposal and did analysis on which would fit our systems best, our members best. So I'm quite confident. As you said, we had a few hiccups getting it out, which is the case, I think, in most large conversions. But we've emerged and will emerge with a technology platform that will allow our members to use electronic banking, digital banking, as good as, frankly, any of our large competitors. And so that's one key part of who we are becoming, and will become known as frankly, a digital savvy technology organization.
You know, one of the things that you empowered all of us at Connect First to do when we were going through that conversion is to make things right for our members. Because, you know, whenever you're going through any upgrade, you know, if Apple updates an app, there's sometimes glitches and so on, and sometimes unexpected things happen. But you said we've got to make it right. And we've collected some amazing stories of things that I know we do that I know from my experience of 25 years in this industry, other banks wouldn't do. I think it's one more reason that we kind of stand apart as a credit union.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it harkens back a bit to my earlier comment of each and every one of those members is an owner. And so we not just do right because this makes sense from a customer relations point of view, but ultimately, as I say, they own the company and they ultimately dictate through the board of directors the direction of the organization. And yeah, we've had a number of amazing stories as a small company of you know, uniquely bending over backwards for members, driving out to their home to make sure they, in fact, had cash, and then doing a bank draft when they couldn't get one sent, and so on. Those are unique, but not unique. I think it's something that we frankly do as a credit union generally. We do go over and above for our members. And as I say, the technology platform is one piece of what's emerging for us as an organization to be competitive. But I think it's also important to note that we are, in fact, going to be launching a brand new financial institution into the market in Alberta in the coming months. And that to me is extremely exciting.
Right on. And so can you maybe bring us a little bit to that decision? Because this is an opportunity, and this is, I have to tell everybody in the audience here, is what attracted me to your vision, is how can we really take a step forward and really innovate as a financial institution to really have a unique value proposition in market. How did you convince the board? How did you convince the employees in this organization to go there when a lot of people were very comfortable with the first Calgary signs and what have you?
Yeah, no, we were in a comfortable state, I think, in terms of having 4 separate divisions. Clearly, there's inefficiencies that come with that. And so one of the challenges, and we knew that going in, was that when you have 4 different brands with 4 different products lineups, for example, 4 different ways to process a mortgage, the inefficiency of that, even though we were as efficient as we could be given that, looking down the road, we simply needed, and every business needs to get more efficient. In the banking business, one of the challenges we all face with interest rates being so low, that's in some ways our price of oil. And so when we have a mortgage rate of 1.79, that's like an oil company trying to manage with a $35 barrel of oil. And so we have to get our costs in line. And again, one of the biggest impediments was the fact the 4 brands, by the nature of the business, created inefficiencies we knew we could solve. And a lot of that solution, frankly, is coming from the technology that we now put in place. But probably more important than that, the plan all along was we needed to grow, and the unique model we created did give us growth. We're about a $6 billion company now, which, again, in the credit union world is quite substantial. But as well, we needed to launch into the marketplace, in my view, as a new, different organization. And so we looked at, for example, do we just continue with First Calgary? And does that brand, again, resonate in towns like Olds and Brooks and Fort Macleod? Or do we come up with a new brand, a new name? One of the challenges we've had, and it's a technical one, is because we have 4 separate brands, we haven't been able to use the words credit union in our branding. And we really think it's important that Albertans understand and find out what a credit union is. And again, we have, in my view, a unique proposition in terms of having a cutting-edge, brand-new technology platform, but as well the focus on and the uniqueness of being a credit union and all that means to our members. So we're going to be launching as Connect First Credit Union. And again, really important that this will be in many ways the first truly new financial institution, certainly to launch in Alberta. And again, as the only Calgary-based full-service financial institution, I think we're going to make a real impact.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. Now, if we could look back for a sec. So you've been through the ups and downs of the Alberta economy right now. A lot of our members, a lot of Albertans out there who might be listening to this podcast are wondering, what is the future for Alberta when you look ahead at the next decade? Any words of wisdom that you would share from your experience?
Yeah, I talked earlier about, and we were in this situation, I think, and there's some analogy to us as a credit union back in the 90s where we weren't diversified. We were focused, for us it was geographic. But by geographic, it also meant the type of loans we could do, the type of members we could attract. And so So to me, diversification for us as an organization allowed us to grow, allowed us to have a lot lower risk. And I think that's in some ways is the challenge ahead of us for Albertans, and we all know that. We all know that at some point in time, we have to diversify away or certainly have less reliance on the oil and gas industry. In my view, it'll continue to be the staple. It'll continue to be the core driver of our economy. And other jurisdictions around the world have done this, right? Which is that it's not easy, and frankly, it'll take some time. But there's the benefits when you look at Alberta, you look at Calgary in terms of the workforce. They're young, they're educated. The towns in Alberta, the two major cities, are great places to live. I've lived in both of them. It will attract people. We still have a low tax base, both personally and business. There's a lot of things to attract companies and people to Alberta. And so I think the biggest challenge for all of us is to think of unique ways for companies to reinvent themselves. I don't think it's a big bang one-time event. I think diversification will take time. But again, when you have those core benefits and elements of a smart, diversified, well-educated workforce, a great living environment, work environment for people. Pittsburgh's done it. Other jurisdictions have done it. So that's what I see. I see over the next decade that we as Albertans will continue to diversify. We'll use the strengths we have from, again, low tax base and the workforce we have, adapting even our downtown offices. What's an imaginary way to think of reinventing these office buildings? And it can be done. So I'm actually quite bullish on Alberta over the next 10 years. It won't be a straight line. On the other hand, I think as the world economy picks up, as the Canadian economy picks up, as I said earlier, typically when the economy goes up, we benefit as much or more. And I think Alberta's in a good position for that.
Yeah, right on. And when you look ahead with that optimism, the next 10 years, like we're obviously very excited about Connect First and how we're going to come to market with a brand launch in a pretty unique way. But in terms of the larger credit union system, some people on the who are listening to the podcast may not know that you're the chair of the CCUA, the Canadian Credit Union Association. And what is your view of the future of credit unions, and why should people care?
I think we're all looking at the world post-pandemic through different lenses, right? And the lens is one of uncertainty for everybody, and in terms of, when's this going to end, what the new normal will look like, will there be a new normal? But I do think credit unions have, again, a unique position going forward in that I think local will really matter. And all credit unions by default are local. Even some that are national by legislation are frankly local, and we're certainly local. And I think not just our industry, but if you think of restaurants and hotels and businesses and retailers, I think the buy local, the support local, that will really be, I think, a key part of everybody going forward, I think, throughout the country. And again, credit unions are uniquely positioned because of that. Because of the nature of who we are local. So that's one important element when I look at the future of credit unions. What's happened across Canada, it's happened in Alberta, we've been a big part of it, is the number of credit unions continues to go down through mergers and amalgamations. And I mentioned a while ago, there is just sort of a certain size you need to be on ultimately to compete. You need a certain amount of size to invest in future technology. And so we're certainly there in my view, but in Canada today, there's about 220 credit unions. And believe it or not, when I joined, there was almost 1,000. And so that's an industry that's consolidating. And in 5 years, I suspect we'll be down maybe under 100. But those individual credit unions across the country, again, I think the fact we can offer a unique member experience, and that's really important, a member experience in that when you walk into a branch or call a contact center, the way we treat you, the way we engage you, because you own our company, because you're a member, it is different, and people are going to realize that. And credit unions across the country, I think, have that same view, same vision. So I'm also very bullish on credit unions. I think the Canadian credit union system, we're much more collaborative than we were 10 years ago. We do all sorts of work together, particularly in the world of technology, because again, size and cost matters. So as I'm bullish on Alberta, I'm also bullish on credit unions. When you put those two together, an Alberta credit union, then yeah, I'm pretty optimistic.
So you've been a CEO for quite a few years. Mm-hmm. You've been a senior leader in an organization for the last couple decades plus. I'm curious if you have advice for those business leaders out there right now who are struggling to find their way forward. And one thing I have to give you a compliment, Paul, you've impressed me as a very courageous leader. Some of the big decisions you've made, bring the mergers to make them happen, to make the big decisions to go and launch a new brand into market, to reinvent ourselves is a very courageous thing to do. Any advice to the future leaders of Alberta out there?
Yeah, I mean, you've often heard status quo is an option when people get into decisions, and it's my view that it certainly hasn't been, frankly, one, and it typically is the wrong solution. And you can go to Kodak and Blockbuster and others that status quo seemed fine at the time, right? And so the advice is that you need to take risks, you need to make decisions that will turn up the apple cart a few times, and things that and they won't go smoothly right out of the gate. And those are things you need to take a few lumps as you make these big decisions. But in any business, I think the word reinvent yourself seems to be quite popular. But when I think of who our credit union is and what we will be in a matter of months, that people look at Connect First Credit Union this spring and say they are completely different and in a good way from what they were 5-10 years ago. And so it's take those risks, manageable risks, understand beforehand, do your homework, show the work before you make the decision. But once you do, make the decision. Yeah, and as I say, status quo is frankly not an option. And even if things are going well, as I say, I think the world we're in and the economy and province we're in, that I think just, again, make those tough decisions, stick with them, continue to focus on what you need for your business going forward, prepare to adapt a lot. Again, if we were doing this broadcast 12 months ago, we wouldn't have said, and if there's a pandemic next year, that might change things. So be thinking of what could happen. You're obviously no one's going to forecast the future like a pandemic, but have some adaptability in your company. I think those are the important parts.
Right on, Paul. So any final words for our audience who's been tuning in today?
I think, as I say, I'm an optimist, but it's not Pollyanna. As I say, I think when I look at, and maybe it's because I've lived in the province for a long time. I've been in this financial services business for 40 years. And so funny enough, I recall back into the 1980s when interest rates were 23%, for you to believe it, and 23%. And at the time, it was unanimous they were going to 30. And of course, they didn't. And then today, they're 1%. So you need to be adaptable to the changes that you're going to see. And I've been through oil at 100 and oil at 10, right? And all of that happens. And so for all you business leaders out there, particularly, your environment's going to change. You don't know how it's going to change. But as I say, you need to be adaptable. Think of your organization. Think of your future. Think diversification. I think that's really important. And we've seen a lot of businesses during the pandemic that were so focused, and lots of time they had no choice, but so focused on certain elements of the business that absolutely got devastated. As best you can, try and diversify. And I think that's probably the most important piece as we look into the future.
Yeah, right on. Thank you, Paul. So, Paul, of course, I got a question everybody wants to know. So is it really as cool as it looks to be a CEO of a pretty significant organization?
Lots of times it is. I'll tell you one thing. You get to see and meet a lot of very interesting people that you might not otherwise, from across the country, some from across the world. So I've been fortunate enough in this role. Sometimes you have to, but usually it's a pleasure. So I've met so many different people from within our industry, outside of our industry, that I don't think I could have met if I wasn't in this job. So that, to me, has been the most rewarding part, including our team and our company. But I get to know more people than I can imagine any other job I could possibly have had.
That's cool. And what gets you excited when you get up in the morning? Like, what motivates you?
Well, the thing about leadership is, obviously, you need a team to lead. I mean, people lead themselves. And within an organization, there are numerous leaders. And maybe the best example I can give is the most recent one, which is when we went through our conversion a couple of weeks ago. And it was challenging. We had a number of members that were frustrated. We were inundated by thousands and thousands of members looking for help and advice. And to me, leadership in that environment is to empower virtually everyone. I don't think we didn't empower anyone to do what's right for every member. That's frankly our mission. And so to me, the satisfaction was letting that happen, to not being, frankly, over-involved. One of the challenges you have as CEO, even inadvertently, if I put out a note or an email and say something, people take it literally. And frankly, in many ways, it can be counterproductive. So I purposely, for yourself and all the other leaders in the organization, have as best I can, stood back, let you do what's right for each member. You make the decisions our team has. And I think we come through that stronger. And hopefully a legacy of that is, as our organization goes forward, the ability to empower employees, particularly when it's dealing with our members, those that own the company. That has to be the legacy of what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. That has to be what we're known for. And if we are known for that, and if our employees feel comfortable with that, and we continue to empower them, then yeah, we're going to have a unique member experience, and one, frankly, that I don't think anyone else can replicate.
Yeah, right on. Oh, just another question I wouldn't mind your thoughts on is, like, are there any particularly memorable experiences, things that just stand out for you as CEO of our organization for the past many years, those moments of that just are special?
Yeah. And, it's funny. I mean, you watch award shows, and I've always had a kind of a bit of a jaundiced view when somebody wins an Academy Award or an Emmy, and they go on stage and make a bit of a speech. But back in the year, believe it or not, 2000, we competed, I guess is the right term, for the first time to be one of Canada's best managed companies. And it was a different award. You competed with companies of every industry. This was the Credit Union Award across the country. And I recall an incredibly difficult process, even the application. They went into minute detail about every part of our organization, from culture to financial performance to what we were and how we were innovative. And this is back in the year 2000. And we won. And it frankly surprised us as a management team. Clearly didn't surprise the judges, but they had a gala event in Toronto, which is a big deal. So a group of us, we brought from all over the organization, not just the executive team, at great expense at the time. And so I bit my lip a bit. I was CFO. And we flew to Toronto, and in a black tie event, literally out of Hollywood, First Calgary was named one of Canada's best managed companies. And I'll tell you, just the joy, the satisfaction that came out of all of us is really hard to describe. And again, I'd never been through anything like that before. And we've won a lot of awards as a company, but as I say, the setting of it, knowing all that we had gone through, and I'd been with the organization for 5 years. And when I joined in 1995, to what transpired in the year 2000 was amazing. And of course, the upshot to that is that we are still one of Canada's best managed companies. We are a platinum member. We're the only credit union to have won that award 20 years in a row. And so even though the galas don't happen anymore, even though we have to go through an arduous competition to get the award continued, it's been amazing. But that to me was a highlight I hadn't expected. And yeah, I still remember it today.
Well, Paul, I have to tell you, I've been working with you now for about almost 9 months, give or take. And I have to tell you, I've been inspired by your leadership. Some of the words that you've shared today that really have stood out for me are things like, we need to be taking smart risks in this province as we look ahead. Business leaders of the businesses of the future in this province need to be thinking about smart risks. We need to be thinking about diversification and how we diversify our businesses. And often we're thinking so much about oil and gas when we talk about diversification, but it's also how do we diversify our own business and design business models that can manage and adapt no matter where whatever the future might hold. Hearing you speak and speaking about some of the decisions that you had to make, stands out for me among great leaders I've had the opportunity to meet in my life. I remember several years ago getting to meet the founders of Nike, talking about how they were making sneakers and how they had to reimagine their company to become a brand around how they changed lifestyles of their members. And I think in many respects, the journey you've been leading us on, going from what we were as a credit union in First Calgary and Chinook and Mountain View and Legacy to become something completely different in Connect First, it reminds me of those stories. You've talked about resilience and grit and how important we've got that. And that's one thing, unfortunately, in this province, we've got it in great supply. We need our leaders of the future to be standing up, the leaders that are going to take us through that next decade to have that resilience. And so with that, Paul, I just want to ask you, do you have any final thoughts before we close our What's Next Alberta TV, our episode?
Well, all I can say is this has been my first podcast, believe it or not. And although I do listen to many, but I haven't had the opportunity to do it before. I found this fun. It's interesting. I think I mentioned to you beforehand that I'm actually, and I've done this a couple times now, speaking to the young leaders. So about 2 weeks ago, I spoke to the young leaders of Alberta. And these are, again, our young leaders, people in their 30s that are going to be the future. This week, I'm actually speaking to the young leaders in the Canadian credit union system. And again, I think for me, if we can lessons learned, inspire a bit, hopefully get them to think in a few different ways than perhaps they had. And I hearken back when I was a young leader, and that didn't exist, right? We kind of literally did it all by
had to figure it out on your own.
Trial and error. Yeah. So yeah, and we do have an amazing group of young leaders. I've had the opportunity over the years to get to know a lot of them. Frankly, a lot of them have turned into our current leaders. So there's lots of opportunity out there. So yeah, so I'm, as I said earlier, I'm extremely bullish and optimistic on our province, on our credit union, on the credit union system of Canada. And when I see the future leaders of all our organizations going forward, that gives me all sorts of hope and optimism. So thank you, Wellington. This has been a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime.
Next steps. We've talked a lot about leadership. We talked about leaders taking smart risks and how important that is going to be for us all collectively building this more resilient, strong Alberta for the next decade. We talked about the importance of leaders having resilience, grit, and that determination it takes to be successful. There is no game plan for how to be successful as a leader. We have to kind of learn as we go sometimes. How important it is for us to diversify our businesses. And we talk a lot about diversification of the economy. Of course, that's true too, but we talked about the need for business models to be more diverse in their thinking so that we can handle the ups and downs a little bit differently. And that's certainly a learning from COVID in the last little while. So, if you like what you saw, please connect with us and connect with others. Share this podcast online, Twitter, LinkedIn, or wherever you take your social media. And until next time, thank you for joining us.